My name's Al Cho, and I'm here on behalf of Xylem, which sponsors the Reservoir Center, to welcome you to this new facility for a really important conversation. Just by way of a little bit of context and history around what this is, um, we, as a company, were based up in New York and decided that we're going to move our headquarters to Washington, D.C. And during the height of COVID, when people thought no one would ever want commercial real estate ever again, we got a really, really good deal on a building right here on the river. And at the same time that we did that, we also realized that as uh, we entered this new way of working, we probably didn't need all of the space that we had signed up for here in Washington, D.C. And so my boss, our CEO, Patrick, said, "Hey, Al, can you figure out what we could do with the space that would actually be of value to the water industry, since we don't need all of it?" And it was like, well, that sounds like a fun thing to do. Let me ask some friends. And so we interviewed about 25 leaders across the water sector, including Matt here. We had a conversation early on. A number of you and your organizations, Nathan, I think we had a conversation early on as well, just to say, hey, if we had some space in Washington that would add value to the sector, what should we do? And the answers were really, really consistent. It was like, it's very expensive to host convenings in Washington. And it's that cost of activation, which actually makes it very difficult for the water sector to do things. And so we're like, well, what kind of space would you want? And they said, well, we'd love a boardroom because our office doesn't have a nice one. People said, we'd love to have some just kind of hangout space if we bring members from around the country into town. We'd love to be able to kind of have them park there, like an airport lounge or kind of a launching pad for their discussions at EPA or on the Hill. And they said, we would love to have a conference space that, is a little bit like the Aspen Institute, where you could host up to 100 people for meetings, book launches, et cetera. And so, we're scribbling notes, and we kind of took all of that voice of stakeholder work together and designed this facility based on the needs of the sector. So we've explicitly kind of drawn a line. There's a small corner of the building on the other side of the building, which is Xylem's new corporate headquarters, and the rest of it is Reservoir. It's for the use of our partners. We have 32 affiliate partners from across the global water sector and slightly beyond, including think tanks like the Aspen Institute and the Stimson Center, global organizations like the International Water Association and the Stockholm International Water Institute, as well as a number of the leading organizations here, not just in Washington, but around the country, ranging from WaterStart out in Nevada to the US Water Alliance, which is distributed all around the country. And the whole point is to create a platform for collaboration and to lower the cost of activation, right? Because there's so many conversations that have to be had among different stakeholders across the water sector if we're going to solve the challenges that we all face. And so we want you to think of this as a space where you can do that. And so if you have any questions about how it works, my colleague here, Josh, and our program manager over there, Maya, if you are really the architects of this space, and they can answer any questions that you might have about how to access it, how to use it going forward. But I'm going to keep my comments brief here and just say welcome. So glad you're here. Important conversation. And just from seeing a number of familiar faces, I know we have the right voices in the room. So welcome.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. I think I'm sort of sorry our president and CEO isn't here, because I think we'd be taking some lessons from everything you just said for our own space. I mean, how jealous are all of us? Wow. So anyway, I thank you, Josh, and thank you, Al, and the whole Xylem community really for putting together this terrific day and a half of what I know is going to be just fantastic discussions all around a variety of water issues all around the globe, domestically, whatnot. And we are so happy to be co-hosting today. And I mean, how inspiring. I mean, look out at the Potomac. How lucky are we? I was just down here on Friday night, a little further down the road, and it's just so, it's an inspiration to see how this place has evolved over the last decade. And again, I want to thank all of our presenters who, over the course of the next day, as I said, are really going to talk about a lot of different global water issues, about water security. So I suppose I should introduce myself, by the way. So I'm I'm Sally Ozell, and I'm the director of the Environmental Security Program at the Stimson Center. And, the Stimson Center is co-hosting today's event. And, when you look at all of the headlines that we're facing, every day, there are so many natural resource issues that just scream at all of us in need of immediate attention, all across the globe. And whether it's, the issues of Ukraine and food insecurity, and then when you add the water issues on top of that, the climate change issues go into the mix and how it affects water, it is really further exacerbating all of the risks, whether global food, water supplies, everything that humanity relies on. It affects all of the ecological sectors, as you can see from behind me, from land to sea. And this is particularly stark when we think about the global south. Um, it's projected that there's going to be something like 3 or 4 billion people will face water scarcity if temperatures continue to rise between 2 and 4 degrees Celsius. And as storms intensify, flood damages will increase. And just, I don't know, I assume everyone saw the pictures that just happened last week at Yellowstone. So for our part at the Stimson Center, we've really worked for decades in this country and all around the globe, really trying to come up with pragmatic policy options, really designed to mitigate what we consider to be some of the most dire and severe challenges of international peace and security. For those of you, if you're not familiar with Stimson, we're a global think tank, a global research institution. We have offices here, obviously, and we also have an office in Brussels. And, honestly, our MO is more of a do tank than a think tank. We really try to, roll up our sleeves, come up with ideas, devise solutions, but we don't stop there. We then go on to identify partners and really try to implement those solutions, and really address the challenges that face all of humanity. And, throughout our programs, we seek to build resilience truly in coastal cities and island states, improve water issues and management throughout the Mekong River Delta, forge partnerships with private sector and the UN, and just really identify those solutions and implement the actions that make a difference for communities who rely on environmental security for their food, their economy, and their livelihoods. And you're going to hear about all of that for some of our projects and programs today. And I know we're going to hear a lot about your other programs and projects today, and I'm really looking forward to that. But, I'd really like to give you all a call of action. Consider joining us. Consider joining Stimson, either by becoming a member of a group we have called the Alliance for a Climate Resilient Earth, or ACRE. And Stan is right over here and can answer any questions about ACRE, or by engaging in some of our own programmatic issues, like my program, and Courtney's here and her with the Southeast program. So needless to say, all of the work we do, water security is certainly at the heart of much of that. So let's think about what we're looking at here for a minute. Leaders in industry and government really need to better understand the impacts of climate change from land to sea, and integrate the climate risks that you see up here on this slide. With that kind of integration, really prioritize actions, because looking at things through a single lens just doesn't work in the real world. So I'm gonna, if I could, just highlight a little bit about my own project, one of my own projects called Corvi, the coastal, we just call it Corvi, which is really, Corvi is designed to implement and advance resilience in coastal communities by really looking at these issues in a holistic manner and mitigating climate risks, including the interrelated risks we see here all across the water sector. So why we developed Corvi as an innovative tool is because we really realized that we needed to compare a diverse range of risks all across the economic, the social, and the environmental issues. Again, if you look at one, it just doesn't seem to fix the issues. And these assessments, what we do is we integrate all this kind of information to produce these holistic assessments that identify the greatest vulnerabilities so that decision makers really can channel their investments and build resilience where it matters most. And so, you know, as I said, too often planners focus narrowly when they design a project. And then what happens is you really can easily miss the related problems that can end up negatively impacting or overwhelming infrastructure projects, for example, down the road, whether it's from inland flooding, sea level rise, excessive heat, drought, aging infrastructure, but also informal housing and poverty. All of these issues need to be taken together when you're trying to think about the future as you build out water infrastructure and other issues. So to get it right at the start, across the sector, we need that kind of approach with detailed local information that looks at relevant risks. So I'm sure you all know, you know, as information becomes available, there's pretty good information at the national and regional levels, even in the global south, but it's really rarely that we can find that kind of detailed information in cities or communities. And so what Corby does is we've really tried to fill this gap by using a very rigorous process to connect the kind of vulnerabilities I just showcased a minute ago. You know, we look at 10 climate risks, which are on the inside, first inside, and then within those 10 risks, we have 100 risk indicators. Now that is a lot of information and a lot of data. And then we come in and we combine surveys with experts and work with community leaders to really fill the gaps. And then we're able to really provide a more complete picture of the city or the island state's climate risks. And we bring together, this is so interesting, we bring together this diverse community of public and private experts whenever we do a Corby. And the Corby process really solidifies that need for an integrated approach. I mean, we so often hear from our workshop participants that it's the first time they've ever met, or it's the first time they've ever worked together. And that's pretty amazing when you think about it, particularly in small island states where they're neighbors or when they work across the governments together. It's their first time. And so it's so meaningful in that after these series of workshops and really rolling up their sleeves, they're now primed to really work together. So where have we been doing Corby? We have done now 11 Corby projects or have some underway around the world, from the Caribbean to the South Pacific and Eastern Africa. And we're continuing to grow Corby as we go forward. But what do we find in some of these Corby projects that we're doing? Well, whether it's Kiribati or Mombasa, Kenya, many of the same water issues come up over and over again, whether it's flooding, whether it's water access, and also coastal cities from like Kingston, Jamaica to Basseterre, St. Kitts, they face incredible flooding, and we see this a lot in the small island developing states. Water comes down from the mountains and meets sea level rise and storm surge, and often their waterfronts are where their blue economies are. So it's really can be dire. You know, this kind of causes severe coastal erosion, causing saltwater also intrusion, and then shrinking aquifers in these places where people really depend on it, all of which affects the security and livelihoods of the folks who live there. You know, the aging water and wastewater infrastructure just frequently is not up to the task. as these threats get elevated. And too often, what we see is waste and debris block pipes, drains, sewers, and this just exacerbates the whole flooding issue. I mean, we hear about stories like, people coming off of cruise ships in these, as the main, again, blue economy of tourism in many of these countries or island states. People coming off of tourism, coming off of cruise ships into a foot of water that has been flooded because of the clogged pipes and drains. Or we hear about airports that are literally, the runways are falling into the ocean because of the seaports and airports eroding. So, when you take all of this into context and you think about the rising urban populations and the fast pace of growth along our coastlines, we have about close to 1 billion people now living in coastlines around the world, and that is just growing exponentially. So there is just going to be this huge demand for water resources, as well as a continued strain on the man-made infrastructure that exists. So what does this mean? It means really that we need to build climate resilience into the water sector, and it cannot be focused narrowly by just building a seawall or a desalination plant. Instead, we really need to look holistically and adapt, to these multitude of issues so that we combine, for example, urban planning with efforts to restore coastal ecosystems, or invest in smart climate infrastructure. A positive first step, yes, but also let's not forget we need to make improvements in waste management, especially in a lot of the informal housing settlements. We've seen this in Castries, St. Lucia, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. It's just really everywhere we work. And when decision makers decide that they want to view climate through this kind of multi-dimensional lens, priorities become much clearer, and overall work becomes much more effective. So almost every Corvi risk assessment that we have done has really brought into focus the importance of addressing these vulnerabilities in the water sector and elsewhere in an integrated way. So by bringing the stakeholders together, just like we are doing here today, this is really how we approach this work. So I'm looking forward to hearing from, the great discussions that are going to go on in the next day and a half, and really learning about your work and, being able to see how we can sort of maximize that and bring it into ours. So again, thank you. And I'm going to hand it over to Josh, unless anyone has questions about Corvi. I'm happy to answer them now, or we can do them later, whatever you'd like to do.
Hello, hello. Maybe we'll transition to our next panel just to make sure we stay on schedule. But if anybody does have questions for Sally, we certainly will be here for the day, right? Okay, excellent. Thank you, Sally. Appreciate that walkthrough for us. That was very comprehensive. I wanted to welcome all of you to today's event. My name is Josh Mahan. I'm Director of Government and Industry Relations for Xylem. What I wanted to do is just kind of frame out the next 2 days for those of you in the audience. All of you have the agenda in front of you. I want you to think in terms of 2 main things that we hope to walk through over the next 2 days. Day 1 is primarily going to be devoted towards a scoping exercise. We want to identify the challenges that we all are observing as to the barriers for adopting innovation towards climate resilience in the water sector. So the 5 panels that will cover the majority of today are primarily oriented towards identifying those challenges so that we all could come together to start coming up with solutions to those challenges. The second thing I want you all to keep in mind is, as you listen to the panelists, as you ask questions, as you engage, think about what you as a representative of your organization can do to contribute towards solutions to these challenges that we've identified. And more importantly than that, not only what you can do as a representative of your organization, but knowing the folks in the audience and the bright minds that are coming here together, what we could do collectively to translate the challenges into solutions and a plan of action. So later today, to close out the day, and then certainly carrying us over into tomorrow, we'll have Sam Reamer and Farwa Amar to help orchestrate a synthesis workshop where we bring together, identify the top challenges, and start rolling up our sleeves to come to the table with solutions towards these issues, as well as contributing your know-how and your resources as organizations towards that plan of action. So that's a little bit about what we hope to cover over the next couple days. Last thing I'll say is day one is where you have the opportunity to hear from some of our panelists. We have wonderful speakers throughout the day. We had some unfortunate dropouts due to COVID, but for those of you who made it today, I wanted to thank you. Day two is going to be mainly for all of you. This is where we kind of turn things around, and we want to hear directly from participants to engage in the workshop. Before I kick off the first panel, I did also want to thank the Stimson Center for partnering with the Reservoir Center on this wonderful event. The idea for this event came together a little over a year ago. Stimson Center was one of Reservoir's first partners. We were super excited when that came to fruition. We've been planning this event for the better part of a year. Alina stepped in, and Simrit and Brian and Sally, a wonderful team. But I also wanted to thank Acre and Stan. Has been a wonderful partner as we've built out this event over the last several months, and certainly Jan and Elise as well. Get a lot of